Thank you for watching today's Critical Thought, your daily bite-sized discussion of game design, courtesy of GameWisdom.com. Hi, this is Josh Bycer from GameWisdom.com. Welcome to today's Critical Thought. Before we get going, I'd like to thank 693 subscribers here on YouTube, an astonishing number. We are getting closer to 700 and my little treat that I have planned. Before we get started with the Critical Thought, one thing I want to ask you folks is about the Patreon campaign. As you know, I use Patreon and the ad revenue here on YouTube to help hopefully support myself and my family. If you have any suggestions for things to add, things to change, things to mention, anything like that, please let me know below and I will certainly take them into consideration. For today's topic, we are talking early access. Early access has become a very popular option for indie developers. The ability to get your game in front of the eyes of hundreds, if not thousands, of consumers, especially people interested in your game to look at it, cannot be understated. On the flip side, it has certainly caused some annoyance and anger for a lot of gamers. The phrase unpaid tester has been thrown around a lot. And the fact that there is no standard for early access has certainly raised some issues. We've seen games that have been put on early access that are either 80 to 90% of the way done, and then those that still have 3 to 4 years of development. Not only that, but the quality of what you start with is also up for grabs. We've seen a number of shovelware and poorly defined titles that are put on early access simply designed for a quick buck. And then again, we have titles like The Darkest Dungeon and Invisible Ink and Don't Starve and so on that have a very strong showing right out of the gate. And it's one of those things that I think it's certainly here to stay. But as with everything with game development, considering the Wild West approach, I think there does have to be some kind of rules or maybe some kind of standards involved. One, to protect the consumer, and two, to help the developer with the right frame of mind for early access. And this is based on the post I'm putting up. Hopefully it should be up by the time you are watching this. It has to do with the 4 factors that will basically are the best chances you have for early access success. The first one is simply, what is the base version? What is going to be the game you are putting on early access from day one? This is a very big deal, much like with Kickstarter. People need to see that you actually have something tangible. You can't just start with like text on the screen that says to be continued or this is all coming in 2 years. The first version of your game should give a good representation of what you are hoping to achieve through early access and what your game should be like with retail. Again, we're not expecting 100% complete, this is exactly what the game's going to be. But your core gameplay loop should either be established or we should be able to see what that is. With games like Prison Architect, the very first version was simply just an empty field and we put buildings down. That's it. There is no prisoners, there is nothing like that. The original version of Clockwork Empires, again, we have people walking around and we put buildings up. Are we expecting late game content? Hell no. Are we expecting things to remain 100% the same? No. But I should be able to pick up your game at any time in early access and I should be able to say, okay, this is what they're going for. Whether it's a platformer, survival game, city builder, roguelike, you name it. And again, this goes back with Kickstarter. The most successful Kickstarters are the ones that already have development done. You need to plan before you go into Kickstarter, much like you need to plan before you go into early access. Now, what you start with, again, we've seen all kinds. When Darkest Dungeon was put on early access, for the most part, it was relatively complete, with exception to the Cove and the Darkest Dungeon / dungeon, I guess you could say. You could see everything that was in the game, and things just grew from there. And that is a very important point, and is the second one that I talked about, and that is what's missing. What is the point of early access? What are we going to see as you develop this game? And again, there's so many different examples. Prison Architect literally transformed before our eyes to be a fully functioning prison simulator slash theme, the Bullfrog simulator genre. Darkest Dungeon, again, we saw new classes, city events, which actually came after release, the Cove update, new bosses, etc. Don't Starve, of course, had new content as well. In some cases, such as with Invisible Ink, the remaining portion of the early access was simply for refinement. The game was 80 to 90% of the way done, and all they needed was that last bit of refinement and adding in the last mission. But again, you need to communicate this to the player. They need to know what your plan is. Is this all your game's going to be? Are you going to add, 5 new game systems? Is your game going to transform from a roguelike into a city builder? We don't know. But that's a very important point. What you're planning on adding needs to be communicated, and you need to gauge, or you need to respect the consumer's expectations. Don't tell me that you're going to add a fully procedurally generated open world massively multiplayer game with infinite replayability, and it will only take us 1 year. Likewise, if your game is simply just putting blocks together, we expect to see more than that over an early access period. But again, you need to manage the consumer's expectations. If something's going to change, you need to spell it out for them, and you need to tell them why it has to change. We've seen both the Darkest Dungeon and Sunless Sea kind of run into a few sore spots during their early access because of this. With Darkest Dungeon, there was the addition of the corpse mechanic, as well as heart attacks that can kill off your character. These were systems that were added to spice up the difficulty and to rein in the expert play. But many people saw this as them just, shifting goalposts and changing things around for the sake of changing it. With Sunless Sea, what they did was completely gut their combat system and replace it with a real-time on the map or on the sea kind of combat. And many players who were expecting the original system were very agitated because the game did change dramatically from what they were originally promised and what was originally there. Now, that kind of entitlement and what you're expecting, that is another critical thought in of itself regarding consumer entitlement. But when it comes to games and early access, again, you need to spell these things out. Any grand changes need to be properly explained. You need to tell them why you're doing this. And again, most importantly, you should listen to the consumer. They should have an idea that their input is being managed or it's being listened to. And some of the best examples of early access have been games that have grown and changed thanks to the consumer. When I spoke with Tim Keenan from Duskers, he talked about how his fans were able to convince him to make changes or leave stuff in, or even find things that he never thought were possible. And again, having all these eyes on your games or in your game is such an invaluable part, especially for a developer when you're only limited normally to just, your friends, family, and yourself looking at your game. I spoke with BitShifter's Classic Games, and they also talk about the wonders and the expertise that they've been, or the joy they've gotten from early access. And again, before, you weren't going to have access to this pool of people. But you need to manage their expectations. When I spoke with Charles from Jara Technologies on Concealed Intent, he talked about how he was very receptive to the consumers and what they wanted to see, what they wanted to add, etc. But he also said at the end of the day, he would not make any changes that would essentially make this game not his. Anything that would affect the sonar system or the detection-based gameplay, if that would have changed, he wouldn't have Concealed Intent anymore. And you need to balance, again, listening to the consumers and their expectations with your plan for early access. Now, the third thing that I talked about is simply the type of game. What are you putting on early access? Some games are simply better for it, and some are worse. Anything that's built around linearity or a single playthrough should not go on early access. And there's two reasons for that. The first one is very simple. You're not going to get the feedback you need. Remember, if you want hundreds of eyes looking at your game, or even thousands, they have to keep coming back. Because remember, every new patch, every new update needs to be examined. If your game is simply a 3-hour story, people aren't going to come back and play it for simple bug fixes, or if you just simply add maybe 20 more minutes of dialogue. With open-ended games like the survival genre and roguelikes, every new update that adds a new system or a new gameplay element changes how that game is played, and people are going to want to see that. With Clockwork Empires, RimWorld, Prison Architect, you can see the legitimate changes from 1, 2, 3, and so on in terms of its updates and alphas. Clockwork Empire's recent beta, where I think I have beta 54C as of this recording, has dramatically changed the progression model and how you build your towns. And again, you can see that growth. But when you're playing a story-driven game or a 10-hour RPG, updates that maybe add new artwork or maybe just change up the UI text, that's not something that's going to keep you coming back and keep people wanting to play. Subnautica is another example. Again, every new update adds new things, adds new elements that grow the game. And again, you want people to see that growth. And we'll talk about that in the final part in a minute. But getting back to the type of game, again, just like with Kickstarter, some games are easier sells than others. But with early access, you have to, again, make sure that your game can work for it. And like I said, sometimes a game just isn't early access material. And I know that sucks, but again, just like with Kickstarter, just like with crowdfunding, you need to plan these things out. If your game doesn't work on early access, then you have to come with something else. Just like if you're really intent on making your game and maybe the first Kickstarter doesn't work, you have to have a plan B and sometimes a plan C. Now for our final point and sort of getting it all together is, when is the game done? When are you actually going to consider this game 1.0 retail, take the early access tag off? This is a big deal, and again, it goes back to everything that I just said regarding planning, managing the consumer, and what you're going to add to this game. You can't stay in early access forever. People will eventually get tired of it, and the longer you stay in early access, the harder it is to keep them engaged. But on the other hand, if you come out of it too soon, your game may not be in a state that's considered 1.0. And remember, that 1.0 distinction is a big deal. That's when the gloves come off. For people like me who look at games, I'm not going to say, well, maybe they'll add this down the line. No, when it's 1.0, I have to look at what you are considered the finished product and what you're selling to consumers. When it's in early access, I can say, oh, maybe they'll add it in at some point, or maybe these things will change. But when you make that switch, you can only do it once. No developer in their right mind would put their game at 1.0 and then say after a month, oh, well, it's not done yet. Let's go back on early access. It also has to do with game pricing. You can always lower your game's price, but you need to be very careful if you want to raise it up, especially once it's already been released. Considering your game is done, that is something way too big for this one critical thought, and way too big to finish up in the next minute or two. Every developer has a different checklist of things they want to add. Every developer has a different game plan. But the important thing is, you need to have a game plan. You need to have a flagpole or a finish line set. Something to tell you and your team the game is ready for release. If you change that, or if things have to be changed, and we all know game development is never a straight thing, that needs to be communicated to your fan base. Prison Architect basically said when it's done. Clockwork Empires has been managing expectations and letting people know that they're still working on it. They want to make the best game as possible. And that is the other important point. You have to show your work. People need to know that something is being done, that the main build of your game is being updated. And if you go too long, people are going to get upset. Ideally, once a month I've seen has been a good average, but you can sometimes push it to maybe 2 months, maybe 3 months for big updates. But once you've set a schedule, you must adhere to it. If I say every 3 weeks there's going to be an update, every 3 weeks there must be an update. Unless, family emergencies or situations come up. And again, going back to what I said, that needs to be communicated. Prison Architect and Clockwork Empires have adhered to a once-a-month update schedule for the entirety of their early access. Prison Architect is done, but Clockwork Empires is still going. And when Prison Architect missed a month, they told their people exactly why. Again, early access, and to wrap this up quickly, just like with Kickstarter and with game development, is a complicated deal. Once you start it, you cannot finish it. And just like with any part of game development or any part of project management, you need to have a solid game plan, and you need to go in knowing what you expect to do, what you have, and what you want to end up with. Being able to make these plans and communicate them is an essential part of project management. I'm sorry if you hear a motorcycle or something outside. Unfortunately, that's real life for you. But like I said, coming up with these plans is an important part of mitigating risk, and the more you do, the greater the chance you have for success. So with that said, we'll wrap things up here. If you have any questions or comments, be sure to leave them below. Check out the Patreon campaign. Like I said at the start, if you have any suggestions or things to add, please let me know. And otherwise, once again, thank you to 693 people here on YouTube. And hopefully tomorrow we'll have even more to report. Once again, I'm Josh Bycer for GameWisdom.com. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you all tomorrow with another critical thought and more content here on Game Wisdom's YouTube channel and GameWisdom.com. Have a great day, folks. Thanks for watching the video, everybody. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment, of course, share with your friends. It always helps out. Check out Game-Wisdom.com, where I examine the art and science of games. You can follow me on Twitch and Twitter under GW Bycer for the latest updates of new content. And be sure to check out our Patreon campaign. You can find us on Patreon under Game Wisdom if you would like to donate and help contribute to keeping Game Wisdom going. Your donations can not only give us the monthly funding we need to keep supporting ourselves, but if we can hit some goals, it will mean more great content for you, and there are some nifty little rewards there as well. Thanks for watching this video, and be sure to tune in to the next one real soon.